Hello everybody, welcome back to another edition of X's and O's Reloaded. I'm Isak Dinesen alongside Joe Thompson. We don't have very much time to get into this episode as we're going to be talking about all 30 Major League Baseball teams, given that most teams' opening day is tomorrow. The Seattle Mariners and Oakland Athletics already played 2 games in Japan, but for everybody else, opening day is tomorrow. We got 30 teams to talk about, and we got not a very long time to talk about each one of them, so we'll get right into it. We're going to be starting with the American League East, considering also here, we're also got our names mixed up, but we're all right here. We're going to be talking about the American League first, as signified by the Minnesota Twins shirt that I am wearing. So, Joe, let's start off with the American League East and give us a little rundown of the teams in that division, what you can expect from them this year.
I kind of based my order on record. So, starting off with the American League East, we have the Boston Red Sox. They won the World Series last year, finished the regular season at 108 wins and 54 losses. This is one of the deepest teams in the American League, if not the deepest team. They have talent everywhere, whether it's in starting pitching, relief pitching, infield is deep, outfield is deep. Mookie Betts is a stud. They have Andrew Benintendi, Rafael Devers, Brock Holt. The list goes on and on. Chris Sale. Huge, really, odds are they're going to be contending for yet another World Series. So we'll just see how it plays out, but in all likelihood, they're not going to. I don't think they'll get to 100 wins again this season, but they're going to get close.
Very hard to replicate that kind of success. Next.
Moving on is the New York Yankees. They finished last season at 100 wins and 62 losses. This team is also oozing with talent. They have Luis Severino and Tanaka leading the starting rotation. Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, the two main just big guys in the outfield. Dylan Betances and Aroldis Chapman and Zach Britton leading the bullpen.
Spent a lot of money on free agency too, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And then they got Gary Sanchez, not a great defensive catcher, but he's another just big power hitter. And then, as we said, Aroldis Chapman. They did spend a lot of money in free agency, but what really would have pushed them, I think, would have pushed them over the top to put them ahead of the Red Sox was to get a guy like Manny Machado and Bryce Harper. They didn't get that. So obviously they're going to contend for the division, but I don't think they're going to get past the Red Sox. Moving ahead to the Tampa Bay Rays, they finished last season one of the bigger surprises of the year.
Certainly.
90 wins, 72 losses, good enough for third place in the American League East, which is kind of crazy. They lost Chris Archer midway through the season. They traded him to the Pirates, but they got the reigning Cy Young winner in the American League in Blake Snell. The roster doesn't look like much on paper, but it's quietly deep. You could see them make some noise, maybe go for a wild card spot this year. We'll have to see.
We'll see.
Next up is the Toronto Blue Jays. They finished last year 73 and 89. I think the Blue Jays, they are a prime example of a very short window of success. A lot of their star talent, they were in their late 30s when they were really talented. They only had 2 years of success when they won the division in 2015 and went to the ALCS. Went back to the ALCS the following year, and then they lost a lot of their star players and traded away a lot of their star players the previous year. I think they're going to be sentenced back to the basement almost. But then we have the Baltimore Orioles.
If only for the Baltimore Orioles, I guess, in that
this
sense.
Team stinks.
It's really
they finished last season with one of the worst records in MLB history at 47 wins and 115 losses. They have not very good pitching. Their outfield is not as what it once was. Their infielding is not good.
Because they lost Machado.
They traded him at the deadline. Yep. Chris Davis alone had, I think, the worst statistical season of any player.
One of the worst
by position player. And they're paying him $23 million a year.
Prayers to the Orioles.
Prayers to the Orioles. You're going to be in the basement for a long time.
So do you think that this division is going to be kind of the same as last year? What do you project the division to be?
I feel like it's going to be around the same teams. Red Sox leading the top with the Yankees keeping it close, but ultimately can't just get past them. And the Tampa Bay Rays, if they can do what they did last year, I think they'll find more success, maybe sneak into the wild card spot. They'll be battling with the Yankees for sure. As far as the Blue Jays and Orioles go, nah.
Yeah, fair enough assessment. All right, we'll move right along to the American League Central. I sorted my teams in here in this discussion by alphabetical order. So we'll be starting with the Cleveland Indians, coincidentally finished last year as the best team in the AL Central, almost by default. They won 91 games. Accurate. With the rest of the analysis of these teams, you'll see why they were pretty much the winner last year by default. They are led by Jose Ramirez and Francisco Lindor, but both are going to be starting the season injured as they both had plenty of power supply in that Indians lineup. But really, they lost a lot more than they gained this offseason. They lost Edwin Encarnacion, Michael Brantley, Andrew Miller, Cody Allen, very vital pieces to their roster. This team is very vulnerable. This is not the team that went to the World Series in 2016 and made the playoffs the last 3 years. This is a very winnable division for pretty much anybody else that's willing to take it, and we'll get to who that team could be in a little bit. The Chicago White Sox, next in alphabetical order, they lost 100 games last year. But that was still good for fourth in the division. We'll see who the other team was that finished below them in a little bit. Their team led by Jose Abreu and Tim Anderson, and really not much else. They got Yonder Alonso in the offseason in a trade with the Cleveland Indians, who was a starting player for the Indians last year, and they lost an outfielder, Avisail Garcia, to the Tampa Bay Rays. And Chicago is a dark horse team, I think, in this division. Even though they lost 100 games last year, there's still a very young roster, and really with these kinds of teams, we saw with the Minnesota Twins in 2017. They lost 100 games the previous year. They go the next season and make it to the playoffs. That could be this team if a lot goes right. It's obviously not a guarantee. It didn't help that they didn't get Harper or Machado, but this could be a team that surprises people, I think, in the American League Central. Moving on to the Detroit Tigers, they lost 98 games. They were just ahead of the White Sox in the standings, good for third in the division. Miguel Cabrera missed a lot of time for the Tigers last year. They're also led by Nick Castellanos. It's an opportunity for them to just hit the reset button, but at the same time, the Tigers don't really have a lot of talent on their roster. And they're led by Ron Gardenhire, former manager of the Minnesota Twins, in his second year. It's just really not that great of a roster right now, even though they did add Josh Harrison to bolster their infield. But the Tigers right now, they're looking like a team that could be struggling yet again this season, possibly playing worse, maybe worse than they did last year. But it's still not going to be a good year for Tigers fans out in Detroit. The Kansas City Royals, they were the team that finished with the worst record in the American League Central last year at 58-104. It's been a long time since 2015, hasn't it, Joe?
Absolutely.
Hasn't it? Absolutely.
That's what happens when you're a small market team.
Alex Gordon's still there, and Salvador Perez is still on the roster, but Salvador Perez is going to miss much of this season due to Tommy John surgery, so that's a big loss for them this season. They did make a few moves in this offseason. They got Billy Hamilton from the Cincinnati Reds. Martin Maldonado is going to fill in for Salvador Perez, a catcher, and Homer Bailey's acquired to help in their starting rotation. But it's another rebuilding year for the Royals. Don't expect too much out of them this year. Don't expect too many surprises, I would say. And then moving on to the last team to go over in the American League Central, it's the Minnesota Twins. They were a 78-win team last year after making the wild card game in 2017. And it's still a pretty young roster, but I think from a Twins fan's perspective, all you Minnesota fans out there that might be watching this, your team might have some confidence this season. They might have some momentum this year to possibly take that division from the Cleveland Indians. I think this is a very good, I think this could be a very good team, but obviously the games still have to be played. Nelson Cruz, C.J. Cron, Jonathan Scope, and Marwin Gonzalez are all very viable additions to this team. They're all right-handed batters, and I think they're all going to provide a lot for this Twins lineup. Or at least Marwin Gonzalez, I think he's a switch hitter, but Marwin Gonzalez is a pretty good utility player. I like what the Twins did this offseason quite a bit. They're a dark horse playoff team in a lot of people's eyes this year, could win the division.
Yeah, I totally agree. Marwin Gonzalez can play infield, he can play outfield. He's just, like you said, a utility player. And now, last but not least, the American League West is who we're going to talk about next. And like I said, I went based on record, starting with the Houston Astros, who not only had the second best record in the American League, they also had the second best record in the entire MLB at 103 wins and 59 losses. This is another really, really deep team.
Really good team.
They were the best team in pitching statistics in ERA, strikeouts, and opponent average. Infield is, in my opinion, the best infield in the American League right now, with maybe even all of MLB, with Jose Altuve, 2017 AL MVP, Carlos Correa, and Alex Bregman.
Like a really strong case.
Really strong infield. And they're no joke in the outfield either. George Springer, Josh Reddick, those are really nice pieces. They did lose, like you said, Marwin Gonzalez. He went to the Twins. But Houston, they are, just like the Red Sox, a World Series contender. They're going to be contending for a very, very, very long time, as long as they can keep the core together. They just have to get past the Red Sox, who really bolstered their roster to beat the Astros last season.
Sure thing.
Next, in the AL West, we have the Oakland Athletics. In my opinion, I think they were the biggest surprise
last year
of the season. They finished with 97 wins and 65 losses. Chris Davis hit 48 home runs last year. He's a stud.
Chris Davis with a K, by the way.
Chris Davis with a K.
Yep.
But I feel like they kind of caught lightning in a bottle. I would have predicted they would be like middle of the pack, and the Seattle Mariners, who we'll get to in a little bit, were going to take control of second place in the division. I don't know if they can keep it up, because it's really hard to replicate 97 wins when you weren't expected to get anywhere close to 97 wins. But they are young, so we'll see what they can be down the road. And then moving on to the Seattle Mariners, they finished last year rather disappointingly not disappointing record-wise, but season-wise, 89 and 73. This team is known for wasting talent. They have wasted the careers of Ken Griffey Jr., Alex Rodriguez, until he went off to different teams, Ichiro Suzuki, and currently Felix Hernandez. They
went on a fire sale last offseason.
Fire sale, got rid of Nelson Cruz, got rid of Robinson Cano. That was the core that was supposed to finally bring them back to the playoffs, and they just didn't do it. Losing key pieces there will be on the downswing for the next couple years until they can find, maybe give Felix Hernandez his only playoff run. And then moving on to the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, they finished last year 80 and 82. They just gave Mike Trout the biggest contract in American sports, 12 years,
a lot of money,
$426 million. A
lot of money.
And the problem with the Angels is that they can't really contend with now that Mike Trout contract, and they have to wait until the Albert Pujols contract has gone away, whether Pujols retires
after like 2022.
After 2022, or if Pujols decides to retire, because he is 39 years old. And they will be probably middle of the pack like they were this year. And it's just really hard to give them much confidence until they have some more cap space to sign some more talent and eventually pay Shohei Ohtani. And then last but not least, the Texas Rangers. They were on the cusp of something great in 2016, and then after getting swept by the Toronto Blue Jays in the divisional round, they basically just fell off a cliff. Rougned Odor, he has talent, but I don't think he's living up to his expectations. It's going to be, after that stretch of strong playoff runs, including 2 World Series appearances, I don't really see them making much noise. I think it's going to be a dark time in Arlington for quite a while.
So if I said right now the division winners at the end of the year might be the Astros, either the Indians or the Twins, and then the Boston Red Sox or the Yankees, would those be fair assessments?
I think those would be very fair to say.
And then whoever doesn't win those divisions that are up in the air, they might possibly be in for a wild card spot. When we come back, we'll be discussing the other 15 teams in Major League Baseball. We will be discussing the teams in the National League when we come back. Hello everybody, welcome back to X's and O's Reloaded, and as you can see by the Chicago Cubs hat sitting here right in front of us, we'll be talking about the National League teams in Major League Baseball heading into the 2019 season, and once again, all 15 teams that we'll be trying to discuss for you in this segment. So we'll be starting out with the National League East, the Atlanta Braves. They were the best team in the Eastern Division of the National League last year, 90 wins. They won the division kind of unexpectedly. They won the division by 8 games.
Yeah.
They have a nice young core led by Ronald Acuna Jr. and Freddie Freeman and plenty of other good players on this team that also acquired Josh Donaldson and Brian McCann, former Brave. This is a team that has a lot of good young players, I think, and a lot of good young bats, but the biggest question mark is, can you trust the Braves pitching when it matters to make another run in October, as they have expectations now? They won the division last year, but can they stay with those expectations and make their way back to the postseason, considering some of the other upgrades made in this division, which we will touch on. Next up, the Miami Marlins in alphabetical order once again. They were 63-98 last year after their fire sale after 2017, and to no one's surprise, they finished with that record. They were last in division by a wide margin, 26.5 games, and they really don't have a centerpiece right now on their roster, at least in my opinion, looking over this roster. They got Curtis Granderson and Neil Walker in the offseason. That might get some butts in seats, but probably not too many wins. They lost JT Realmuto to the Philadelphia Phillies, as we will discuss later. This team still needs to acquire a lot of talent. They're still rebuilding. It's not going to be a year that I don't think it's going to be a year that the Miami Marlins shock a lot of people. Next up, the New York Mets. They were 77-85 last year, and they're a team that, you know, they still have plenty of good pitchers on their roster. Noah Syndergaard and Steven Matz, among other arms in that team, and then Michael Conforto was their best hitter on the team last year. 28 home runs last year, very respectable. And they also had a very busy offseason. They got Robinson Cano, Wilson Ramos, Keon Broxton from the Milwaukee Brewers, Edwin Diaz, former Seattle Mariners closer, in that Robinson Cano trade, and also got back Juris Familia. He was on the Oakland A's last year. The Mets didn't really lose very many people, and a lot of baseball pundits out there are projecting the Mets to be a better team this season, considering all the moves they made, getting guys like Cano and Wilson Ramos.
Let's not forget, they also re-signed Jacob deGrom to a blockbuster deal.
Big deal with that as well.
He is one of the best pitchers in the National League last year. Had an ERA under 2, I believe. Very good year for
the Mets, at least projected by many. It's just a matter of whether those pitching arms can will them to a good season. The Philadelphia Phillies, they were a solid team for much of the year last year. They were close to 500, 80-82, third in the division, but I think a lot of people now are starting to sense that this might be the most improved team in maybe all of baseball when all things are considered. They still have good young players like Rhys Hoskins and Odubel Herrera, Maikel Franco, Aaron Nola, one of the best pitchers in the National League last year. And then you take that core that was all right last year, and then you bring in a guy like, Bryce Harper, like signing him to that big contract, and also getting a very solid shortstop in Gene Segura, JT Realmuto, as we mentioned just a little bit ago, Andrew McCutchen, not what he was, but still very solid.
Still solid.
Very solid outfielder. David Robertson acquired to close games for the Philadelphia Phillies this year. I think they should be favorites, to win the division this year, based on all the talent they acquired, not just getting Harper. It's not the Harper move, that wasn't just a one-time thing. That wasn't just a one-deal thing. They got a lot of new players that should be needle pushers for them this season. And lastly, the Washington Nationals, they were considered favorites to win this division last year, but just struggled too much. They only finished one game above 500 at 82-80, and they still have a lot of really good players on their roster, like Juan Soto leading their offense, and then Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg to lead their pitching staff. But they lost Bryce Harper. That's certainly going to hurt, but they really didn't lose too many other important pieces on this team, in my opinion. They also got Yan Gomes. They stole the catcher from the Indians away to be their catcher this year. They also got Patrick Corbin and Trevor Rosenthal to help out in their pitching department. It's not a bad roster. You might think, if you're a Nationals fan, possibly Oh, man, it's really unfortunate that we lost Bryce Harper. But, hey, look on the bright side. You still got a lot of great players on this roster that can contend for a spot in the playoffs this year. Just a matter of whether or not they can put it all together, in my opinion. It's just going to be a matter of whether they can stay consistent throughout the entire year, which is what plagued them in 2018.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. Moving on to the NL Central, we're going to go ahead and start with the Milwaukee Brewers. They finished last year 96-67. Isaac, they were one game away from the World Series.
They were.
Their first World Series would have been their first World Series appearance since 1982. They have the reigning NL MVP in Christian Yelich. He had an unbelievable season last year. They have a strong infield and outfield, and they have a really good relief pitching. Led by Josh Hader. That dude
He's
just
really good.
lit it up.
He's really good.
And that was like his first real season as a pitcher in the major leagues, and it was really, really impressive. Nobody could hit his fastball. The real big question I have with the Milwaukee Brewers, which was kind of an issue last year, was starting pitching. They had some talent at starting pitching last year. Those like Gio Gonzalez, those players are now gone, and I'm really not. That's their biggest question going into this season. They should be a division contender for the next few years, and maybe they should win it this year. If not, it will probably be our next team, the Chicago Cubs. They finished last year 95-68. They should have won the division. Unfortunately, just really bad collapse at the very end of the season, losing the game 163 to win the division, and then losing in the wild card game. They have a solid starting pitching rotation, though it is starting to get up there in age a lot. Only 2 of their starters are below 30 years old. They are loaded in the infield and the outfield. Relief pitchers are not as strong as they were, but they still have some depth. They should be a division contender for a few more seasons, but if they want to win another World Series, they need to be as dominant as they were in 2016. Moving ahead to the St. Louis Cardinals, they had an upscale year, but not in previous Cardinal seasons. They finished 88-74.
Had to fire Mike Matheny last year.
They had a blockbuster move getting Paul Goldschmidt in a trade from the Diamondbacks. That leaves them with now 3 first basemen on their roster, although Matt Carpenter can play third base. There's not much in terms of pitching that I can see other than Adam Wainwright, who's 37 years old, Michael Wacha, and an aging Andrew Miller. They have some nice pieces on outfield. I could see them probably in the middle of the pack this year because nobody's getting past the Brewers and the Cubs. And then
Paul Goldschmidt move might be a needle pusher, though, for the Cardinals. Who knows?
We'll never see until they play the games. Moving on to the Pittsburgh Pirates, they picked up Chris Archer in a trade last season. A nice pairing with Jamison Tyone. They had a good record. They finished 82-79, but I think they kind of overachieved a little bit. It's not what they were in the earlier part of the decade, where they were making moves. They were winning games. They were making it to the playoffs, something they weren't doing previously, and now it seems like they faltered back when losing Andrew McCutchen, Garrett Cole, those pieces that got them to those postseason appearances. I see them bringing up the rear a little bit. Just kind of, we'll see what happens. Then last but not least, we have the Cincinnati Reds. They finished last in the division, 67-95. I see they do have some nice pieces to build off of. They have Tanner Roark, a great starting pitcher at 28 years old. Yasiel Puig hasn't quite fully lived up to his potential. Like, he got off to that hot start when he was a rookie with the Dodgers. And then they also have Scooter Gennett. Joey Votto, I think he wants one more chance at a World Series. Whether or not it's going to be with the Reds, I'm not sure. He is 35. They might send him to a contender so he can win one. But if he was able to stay with the Reds for his whole career, I think that'd be pretty cool.
Very admirable.
They're building something. I just don't think it's there yet. It'll be a few years down the road, but I can see them making some noise in the later years.
Fair enough. And then final division, as we've rapidly gone through the rest of the major leagues, we're going to finish this off with the National League West, beginning in alphabetical order with the Arizona Diamondbacks. They were 82-80 last season, and they were third in the division, far cry from where they were the previous year. They still have plenty of good pitching on, like at least in terms of pitching talent on their roster, like Zach Greinke and Robbie Ray. David Peralta leads their offensive attack, but they didn't really acquire too many needle pushers. They got Adam Jones in the offseason and Greg Holland in their bullpen, but losing Paul Goldschmidt and A.J. Pollock, which we'll talk about in a little bit where he went, that's going to be hard to overcome, I think, for Arizona, considering where they were last year with the group they had, and now losing quality players like they did. Going to be very tough for them to get back into the thick of things with the other teams in this division. Next up, the Colorado Rockies. They lost in Game 163 for the NL West title to the Los Angeles Dodgers. But they did go to the NLDS after beating the Chicago Cubs in the wild card game. They still have plenty of great hitters on this team. Charlie Blackmon, Nolan Arenado got paid a lot of money, and then Trevor Story as well to round out this hitting core. But they did lose other guys that were very important to their success last year, like DJ LeMahieu and Adam Ottavino. They got Daniel Murphy in the offseason. Good, I guess. I mean, again, they still have a great hitting core to build off of, but it's not a great playoff roster right now. Kyle Freeland's a good pitcher for them. It's just a matter of whether they can get other talent on their roster in the pitching department, whether they can make a run this year. The LA Dodgers, they won the National League last year, got into the World Series, lost in 5, won 92 games, and they were kind of middling around in the middle of the near 500, it seemed like, or just teetering on playoff contention for a while, and then they finally turned it up in the latter part of the season. They got A.J. Pollock from the Arizona Diamondbacks, and Russell Martin's back in Los Angeles now, but they lost Machado and Grandal. It's just a matter, and Yasmani Grandal, he went to the Milwaukee Brewers. It's just a matter of whether the Dodgers can avoid the kind of season they had for most of last year. They should ideally be contenders for the World Series yet again with all the players they have, like Cody Bellinger and Justin Turner and Corey Seager. It's just a matter of whether they can stay consistent through most of the year, the whole way, and live up to their potential. The San Diego Padres, they were a 96-loss team last year, but they made a big splash getting Manny Machado in the offseason in free agency. Signed him to a lot of money.
Very, very surprising.
A lot of money. And they also got Ian Kinsler to add to their roster. But it's not a playoff roster this year. Even though they got Machado, a franchise cornerstone like Machado, it's not a playoff year, I don't think, this year. Fernando Tatis Jr. is going to be a player to watch for the San Diego Padres if he comes up the system, as well as Vladimir Guerrero Jr. for the Toronto Blue Jays. Forgot to mention that earlier. But, the Padres are a team that's got a lot of young players on their roster that are going to hopefully contend for them down the road. Probably not this year. And then finally, the San Francisco Giants, they were an 89-loss team last year. It was an even year for them last year, but it was not nearly what they've lived up to in terms of producing an even years. They were 4th in the NL West last year. They still have plenty of good players like Madison Bumgarner and Buster Posey, Brandon Crawford, but they really didn't acquire anybody super significant that can get them back into firm contention in the National League. So it's an odd year for the Giants, and with the way that it's been this decade, probably don't expect too much in terms of contention from the San Francisco Giants.
I don't really think you can make the odd and even years jokes with the Giants anymore because they just don't have the same talent that they did when they won those 3 World Series titles. So I think you could kind of start to see them rebuild, but you never know.
Still have a good core, but it's probably not going to be a playoff year for them. So now with the National League, considering what we know about them, it's going to probably be the Los Angeles Dodgers winning the NL West, and then probably a combination of either the Cardinals, Brewers, or Cubs. It's probably wide open, I think, in the NL Central right now, and then possibly the Nationals or Philadelphia Phillies or the Atlanta Braves. The National League's a lot more wide open in terms of divisions. Who do you think takes some of them? What's your take on some of these divisions in here?
I would agree that the NL Central is going to be between the Cubs and the Brewers. I'm not fully sold on the Cardinals just yet, but I do think they can make some noise with getting Paul Goldschmidt. NL West, I don't fully think that the Dodgers are totally a lock for that division. I think although the Rockies did lose some of their pieces, I think they're still a very dangerous team, and I think they can make a legitimate run at the division. And then for the NL East, I think it's like you said, it's going to be mostly likely between the Phillies and the Braves. Maybe the Mets if they can stay healthy, if their pitching can stay at the top-notch level it's been for the past few years. So we'll have to see what's up.
Can't sleep on the Nationals either. The NL East is going to be very competitive. That's all the time we have for this week's X's and O's. Hopefully all our takes on all these teams, even though we did them pretty quickly, hopefully they were all coherent, and then we can look back on this video in October and see how completely right we were.
Or wrong.
Possibly. That's always a possibility as well. For Joe Thompson, I'm Isak Dinesen. We'll see you next week.